moving right along. I am Delray Cross. Again, today's July the 24th, 2023, and I'm going to read to you the last of the November poems, which are the from top to bottom November 2022. Because it is, like I said, it's July the 24th, 2023. November will come later this year, and I will, if I'm still around, presumably be writing these things still. But until then, you'll hear no more November poems after I finish these, which I probably will not finish in one sitting, I don't think. But there are 30 of them, and the first one I know is a couple of them are fairly long. This one I think is long. Wednesday, November the 2nd, 2022. Anachronism number 3758 is called Pick It Up and Move It Forward. I'm saying that a little louder than normal because it's in all caps, the title. Not something I normally do. It doesn't have to be an apocalyptic backstory or even an end-of-the-world apocalyptic climax in your narrative at all. The genre of fantasy is about as serious a genre as one might encounter in the world of fiction. We're still in the fiction section, okay? Whatever adaptation, and they have been multiply significant, which characters are, at one point or another, conclusive, whether they held the control, whether the wives were androids being replaced by androids, and when and how the audience is cognizant about anything the characters, wives, or husbands, or whomever, were unaware of. Are there separate realities for the sexes? Are there separate realities for the sexes? Is there any omniscience within the story? Are the Stepford wives cognizant? When and how and on what level are they relatable? How about when Glenn Close begins Stepfordizing the other sex, the men? And do the women then get real power? Does the addition of this line in this stanza destroy the sonnetness of this piece about the wives' subservience and the characters' willingness to either play along? Were they robots unable to play along, each and all? No, this doesn't seem to be the case. And again, has Close provided new deep meaning in the switch of the role of the sex of the automatons from female to potentially male? Sound like an academic paper of a certain era, I think I probably should say these days. What if Rose Byrne and Ted Danson played roles in this all-star, more serious, less campy, but funnier version? Doesn't the time frame allow for the possibility that these three actors had worked together before the dystopian Damages? Why'd I just pigeonhole Damages into dystopian? Subgenre, right? No need to genreify dystopian this way. Nah. Milk the fantasy, rewrap the bleak, be Matthew Broderick nerdily in charge of the subservient wife fantasy of being able to control Nicole Kidman by the various methods vaguely referenced earlier. Scroll up. Close with the sort of feminist fantasy. This is not what we call the genre of fantasy, am I not right? I know there are android bleeps and bloops mixed throughout some of these individual plot lines, but what about the dragons of PHANTASY fantasy as they blobbily move from Ursula Le Guin to George R.R. Martin? The way of which author is best? How about, personal favorite, Robert A. Heinlein? Asterisk. Let's start bringing him up a lot. His was my favorite science fiction writing. I was 9 to 11 years old when I ate up all of his middle school and high school library tomes. Yeah, how about Robert A. Heinlein? The most reliable to me at the time of my reading. There was an admixture of fantasy with the sci-fi, I called it. Maybe I'm thinking about how sci-fi turned so dark after the 70s and 80s. The optimism dissipated, even if it was that rare apocalyptic theme iconic milestone. In general, optimism disappeared. All this stuff, all of this relatively insignificant stuff to anyone else I know, was meaningful. And yet, to me, because of my very personal and precocious relationship with these writers' characters and my active engaged reading at that young age of so much of it, strapping in with the endless optimism of the bogs of science fiction, in the bogs of science fiction. But it would take so many years before I could ever begin to understand camp and its relation to this stuff. This is what I glom onto now. But what of it? I'll tell you what of it. I can't quite get to the apocalyptic dead-end science fiction and fantasy. The bleakness it inevitably would be this is fine. And again, thank goodness for Star Trek, Strange New Worlds, and all the Star Treks these days. Because, I don't have a clue about many things here. And yet, who's the narrator of this? Nerdy 80s jokes? And the scolding of into voting. There. Let's end it this way, with tut-tuts, meant well, if at all. One 5-line stanza with more lines than that, but in essence, thanks to a lack of length of white space, but still it's one page, 5 lines. So long as they might be split up. Where do we find the hope I have, created by opening it all up just so? Did any of that make sense?